The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark, I cannot see.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and Chief Storymaker at Elkins Consulting. You probably know, listeners, that I am very active on LinkedIn, and I have been for many years. And one of the things that I love the most about LinkedIn, as opposed to some of the other social media sites, is that I meet people differently. It doesn't seem as one-sided to me on LinkedIn. As soon as I comment on somebody's post or share somebody's post, I hear back from them, and it creates a real connection. So this is no surprise to my listeners that I met Corree Roofener from LinkedIn. And when she reached out to connect with me, I looked at her profile, and I saw that she is in this little tiny town in Western Montana called Trout Creek. And probably a lot of Montanans, especially on the eastern side and the central side of this huge state, probably have never even heard of Trout Creek, Montana, much less visited it. But as I mentioned to Corree before we hit record, I know Trout Creek because my husband and I took our boys to the Knoxon Reservoir, which is Trout Creek is the nearest little village, really, to that reservoir. And we spent a long weekend there with our boys right before we officially became empty nesters. So I have a special love for that area. And I'm just so grateful to have been connected with Corree. And I'd love to welcome you to this podcast. Your stories don't define you, how you tell them will.
Thank you, Sarah. I can't tell you how much I appreciate being here, but also just the impact of what you do and how you embrace and teach others through stories.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, Corree, you probably know because you listened to a few episodes of the podcast that I love to begin by asking my guests to share something about themselves that most people might not know. And just for a refresher for our listeners, the reason I do that is to give them multiple perspectives on you as a human being before we launch into the question that I can't stand, which is, what do you do? Which, of course, you know, I also don't ask that question, but we will get to it in a roundabout personal narrative kind of way. So do you have something you could share with us?
Yeah, I think, one of the number one things that most people who hear me or see me or, are exposed to me in different ways don't know is that I am a complete introvert. I was very, very shy growing up. And so I let that begin to evolve into who I thought I was supposed to be. So introvert, and there's social introverts, which is what I've realized I am. I'm a social introvert. I like people, but I like my quiet time. But for many years, I believed that I was too shy to do that, this to do that, to that to do that. And so that's what a lot of people don't really know about me, is that part of my story as a child.
That is interesting. I think I'm never surprised by that comment, because you wouldn't believe how many people on this podcast begin with that. And it makes me wonder why we're so quick to make a decision, give a label to somebody that we see externally. And again, it's this idea that on social media, online in general, we only get one aspect or a handful of aspects. We can't really understand the complexity of the person behind the profile unless they're sharing it. And even so, we have a tendency to judge or decide on what a person is or who a person is based on very little information.
Totally agree. 100% agree. Like, just, you learn about people as you're exposed, like you said, having connection, whether that be in a live event or just having a written connection, like you said on LinkedIn. Someone responds to something you say, and there's this immediate conversation happening, or almost immediate conversation happening, and that feels so different. But we tend to put everybody in a box. This is what you look like. But I think not even as adults, we do that as children. We're taught that, we're modeled that as children, right? Well, if you do X, you're Y, and if you do Y, you're Z. And that's really one of the things I work hard on with my kiddos is not telling them those stories, letting them define their own stories, or labels or titles or whatever that may be. Um, because yeah, I mean, I think because definitely because I've told myself those stories for so long, of what other people's definitions of who I was, but just like to embrace and to allow them to define that own story is so amazing to watch.
Definitely. And to allow the shift all along the way. I think that was one of the things I was so surprised by in having children. I didn't intend to have kids. I was in my mid 20s and was like, nope, never having kids, never getting married. And then I met my husband. We had two boys, and they were both planned, just so we're clear here. Not that that matters, but to me it mattered because I really had no intention of having kids. And one of the things I noticed is that when they were born, each of them, of course, was completely different. My older one came out smiling, like his eyes were wide open. He didn't cry. He didn't want to be swaddled. He would face out. If I tried to swaddle him and put him in the snugly facing my chest, he would squirm and fuss. And then I turned him around so he could see the world and he was fine, totally mellow. And then the opposite was true about the younger one. He was screaming when he was born. He didn't smile for the first 6 or 8 weeks. He was super fussy for 6 or 8 weeks. And we were just so puzzled by it because Jacob was not like that at all. And even as young as toddlerhood, the older one would pick up a banana and it would be a phone and he'd call my mother. He'd say, "Hi, Bubby." And the younger one would pick up the banana and it would be a gun.
I love it.
And we don't, I mean, my husband hunts, but we're not like a gun culture family. Anyway, it was very surprising to see that. What's even more surprising is that as the older one grew up, he became the more emotionally complicated one. And he also became completely obsessed with guns, not to hunt or shoot any living being. He can't stand killing anything. He catches spiders to release them. I mean, he can't kill anything, but he's just fascinated by the artistry and the mechanics and the fire, the chemicals that create anyway, he's totally fascinated by them. Younger one has nothing to do with them. I mean, he'll go out with his brother and shoot at the range sometimes, but they've completely switched places. And I think so many times as parents, we hold on to what they were.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a really, really hard time allowing that shift.
Mm-hmm.
So I know a little bit about what you do, and I think this is going to wrap perfectly into that whole labeling stuff. It always finds its thread, right?
Yeah.
You've listened to a few of these episodes. I would love for you to share with our audience what you do without telling us what you do by sharing a story about a recent interaction with a client or somebody that you work with.
Okay, so this is trying for me. I'm not going to lie. Like, this is awesome in so many ways, but so like, oh, how do you do that? So, I think what I'm going to share is that I was with a client recently and I was actually a new client. So this is a very new relationship. And we're talking about the details of doing work together. And I started asking her questions like, but can you tell me why you say that? And she would pause and she'd be like, well, I don't know. I don't know is the great answer of like, let's not talk about that. But we dove into it and I explained it from a practical standpoint of what needed to be done or should be done. And that kind of moved into untelling a story that she had told herself about this specific task, right? And about who or where she was going in there's that role, that label that was put on her, right? And so this 30-minute conversation literally turned into over an hour. And I actually did a podcast with her too, eventually, because the connection was just so clear and so real.
Mhm.
And so that was just, I think that's one of the things I love about life or what I do. I don't, what I do, like you said, about the connections I make in how I make a living, because it doesn't have to be so black and white. And
Right.
and when we start to dive into why this is happening or why this is happening, in your business, in your personal life, whatever it is, we start to ask if questions are being asked of you, we start to delve into those questions and then begin to ask ourselves, well, why do I believe that? Or why do I do that? Or why do I see that? And so, yeah, I think that's been the coolest part of it.
Yes. Well, that reminds me of when I finally hired a bookkeeper.
Okay.
And I was saying, I'm embarrassed. I'm looking at my QuickBooks through her eyes, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have an MBA. Like, I should have been able to set up payroll in QuickBooks. But my MBA didn't cover anything about being a business owner. Entrepreneurship was definitely a theme, but not the ins and outs, the daily ins and outs of being a business owner, especially as a solopreneur.
Yep.
And I remember having this conversation with her, and she said, Sarah, you're a StrengthsFinder coach. You know this to be true, that you are really good at other things that I would never in a million years take on because it's not my area of expertise. It's not something I am interested in at the level that you're interested in it. So don't be embarrassed because this is what I'm really good at. And I know that. I don't expect anyone else to be as good at it as I am.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, I don't think, I actually know, I feel like that when we begin to kind of unravel or, open those petals of that flower and we come back to what we innately know about ourselves. Like, and we know it, we just put it aside, right? Because it's one, not comfortable, two, not successful, three, not a career. It can be 100 different, things. But what we do is we walk away from what we innately do so well, or we cover it up. But when we can start to kind of own that, take value in that, we begin to find that, yes, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But in that, what do we have to do? We have to ask for help.
Yes,
So hard, right? Like,
it
and
is.
it's not just like paying somebody, right? You're paying your bookkeeper, or you're paying a coach, or you're paying whatever it is. This is really asking, not only asking for help and being vulnerable and saying, I've screwed it up, I need
Mhm.
help now, but
Mhm.
also asking like our loved ones, right? That's one that's
Right.
really, really hard for me. Like, I need help. I can't
Mhm.
continue to do all of this and still do what I did or do or whatever it is. And just
Mhm.
really saying, you know what? I need you to step into helping me in a different way. And that could be our children too, right? Because
Right.
we,
Especially as they grow and our
yes,
expectations shift.
yes. But
Right.
we tend to like, oh, but I have to live on this mountain, do it all, see it all, be it all in order to be successful.
Right. Yep. I think it's especially interesting. I love coming back to this because as a StrengthsFinder coach, one of the things I do with business owners is I help them understand what their blind spots are so
Mhm.
that they can address them, not to get good at something they're not good at. I'm never going to be a bookkeeper, but to make sure you're surrounding yourself with the people who are good at those things so you can focus on being exceptional at what you're good at, not just be good at it. And
Yes.
also making sure you have the tools around you. Like I don't have any of the executing domain in my StrengthsFinder top 10. I think my first one's like number 15 or something. It's really sad. But the great thing about that is that now that I know that, I have people and tools in my life to help keep me accountable, help keep me moving forward. And it's the only reason I've been successful in my business is that early on, I had a coach tell me, okay, here are the people you need to surround yourself with. Here are the things that you're never going to want to do. And anytime you do it, it's going to drain you and you're not going to have room for the things you're great at.
Yes. And so like one, how much does that empower us, right?
Oh, so much. It was a
right? Like we
game
sit there.
changer.
Yes, it's a game changer. But then, also investing in ourselves. We fight that, especially as we're
Right.
starting businesses. Like,
Hmm.
oh, there's no money. We can't do this. Well, but when we talk about becoming the best version of ourselves, which in business is exceptionally important. In life, it's
Yes.
exceptionally important. But business, I mean, it's the matter of making it in those 5 years or not making it. And investing in ourselves, we learn these things that empower us to be better business owners, parents, spouses. I mean, all of it, it
Right.
all comes down to the same thing. But, for
Hmm.
me, you talk about that. For me, it's like web design. Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how. Oh my gosh, that is so infuriating to me. Like my blood starts boiling and I don't get angry, but I'm just like, yeah, I'm done. I'm walking away. Just walk away. But in order to, pay somebody to do that, that was so hard for me at first
Hmm.
because I was like, no, really can't afford this, this. Or hiring my first coach. Wow, that was an investment, but
Me
so
too.
life changing.
Hmm.
And always being interested to understand that I will never probably be 100% where I need to be, that coaching is going to evolve as I evolve.
Exactly.
And that,
Ongoing. And
yes,
yeah. Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. And that's a perfect example of hiring a web designer. I know that when I hired that bookkeeper, my income increased more than enough to cover her cost within 3 months.
right?
It's like, oh, that's why StrengthsFinder matters. That's why understanding what your blind spots are matters.
Yes.
So I'm loving this because it comes back to labels. So I think our listeners now are ready to hear what you do, just so that it's very clear. I don't want any questions, so that if there are referrals to be made, there's no doubt about how that
I
works.
love it. But here's the wonderful thing about that, Sarah, is what I do is still evolving, right?
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah,
Right.
we were just talking about that. So by trade, I'm a bookkeeper. Ta-da!
Uh,
And I love it. I love empowering small businesses to dive into their superpower and let me do the books, because that has been something that's always been very, very innately in me. From a young child, I can go back and remember helping my mom with the grocery budget, right?
oh, wow.
Yes. Okay. So it's just innately something that I do well. And I understand well. And but when I talk about evolution is that I've evolved through those coaches, through that investment in myself, to this understanding that I love coaching. So I am also a coach, and I do a lot of personal finance coaching, a lot of coaching for moms. Again, really addressing those titles and those
Mhm.
boxes we put ourselves in, but also stepping outside of it looking a certain way, getting off that mountain of having to do it all, be it all, because so many moms are entrepreneurs, are working moms, are, maybe foundation designers, whatever it is. And we're constantly telling ourselves, and I will like raise my hand, I'm still constantly telling
Of course.
myself, you're not doing enough. You're not the mom you were 15 years ago. You're right, I'm not. But I'm teaching something different than I was teaching 15 years ago. And so yeah, I'm a coach, a life coach for a lot of moms, a lot of foster and adoptive moms. That was the cycle we spent for 13 years in our life. And so I have this passion for that community of people and the need there to really build and take care of and remind ourselves that we don't have to do it all.
I love that. And it just reminds me back to the very first story you told, which was uncovering what was really at the root of your client's financial questions.
Yes.
It wasn't necessarily financial. And that's where I was going with that. I love that you started with that story without acknowledging that this might have been a new client that was looking for a bookkeeper, not even a coach. But you can't, in your business, if you're doing it well, you're always going to be both. My bookkeeper, I consider to be also a coach, a trusted coach to me, because
Yes.
she tells it like it is. This is where you're spending too much money. This is something you might want to be aware of. She never uses the word should, which brings me so much comfort because I don't want to be should on. And that just feels condescending to me. And she knows that when that happens, all it does is it shuts me down. So she's
Right.
highly aware. So um, tell me about that kind of coaching client, the financial coaching client. Again, that a similar story. I'm sure you have
Yeah.
lots of them, but if you could pick out one in particular, so our listeners can see themselves in the story.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I mean, there's two things that come up, and you talked about your bookkeeper being your coach and never using the word should, because that is not our role. Our role is to advise. Here's where you're at. Do the part that you don't like. And so I have clients that say, you know what, I don't want that information. Okay, great. If you do, you know where I'm at.
Right,
Right? That's
exactly.
accepting and owning. And so I think it's important. Not all people are ready to make the changes in their business. That's their choice. That's their option, right? Maybe they're successful enough where they're at. But one of the biggest things I think I've had is one of my legal. So I have quite a few attorneys on my load, and so I love client trust accounting. So I have this attorney, and um, we've been together for a couple years, and she began talking about a dream just in
Mm.
our monthly conversations. And I'm like, okay, and never gave me any specifics. Okay, just a dream. And I said, I can start sending you quarterly comparisons. You can kind of see from where you were last year to this year. We can talk about, what's being used, what's not being used. And so we started doing that this last year. And in December, she contacted me and she goes, so um, I have the question, would you be willing to take on a second set of books, a very small? And I'm like, well, absolutely. How can I help you? What's the industry? This kind of stuff. She goes, well, I've opened up a tattoo shop.
Oh my gosh,
I'm like, what? And
that was
she's
her
like,
dream.
she goes, yeah, I have this art minor and I've always dreamt of having a tattoo shop. And I finally just did it. And I'm like, I actually cried a little bit. I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot tell you how exciting I am. What most people don't know is I'm pretty much covered in tattoos.
Oh, yes, that is something I would not know. See, that should have been your first answer.
I know it should have been right. But anyone that sees me, because I don't hide them unless it's cold,
Right.
knows that they're there. So it's like one of those things. But and so we started walking through what that would look like and how it's, just really small. And I'm still working both businesses. And but it was so full circle. Like, because I took the chance to just ask, like, is there anything you want to change in your business? Is there anything you want to start seeing in your business from an advisory role? She was able to say, well, yeah, I'm actually looking to see where my minimums are and how much do I really have to make each month? How many clients do I have to take on? She wasn't telling me what was back there, but
Right.
it encouraged her to really start looking at her numbers a little bit differently. Now, obviously, she was already curious enough to ask, oh, yeah, can you show me this or can you show me that when I brought it up?
Mm-hmm.
But it empowered her.
Right. And she might not have even thought about who to ask those questions because they were still rolling around in her head. And she may have been concerned about trust issues. Like
Yes.
if I tell my partner, if I tell my spouse or my friend that this is what's going on in my head, they might try to talk me out of it.
Yeah. Or put the label like a tattooist. Ooh,
Right.
let's own it.
Or sometimes be so supportive and encouraging that it becomes overwhelming. And now I'm beholden to this idea because I shared it,
Yes,
right? Like
absolutely. That's
now
one
I
of
have
my
this
stories. You're
accountability,
hitting the
right?
nail on the head there. That's one of my stories I'm telling right now to myself is like, if you tell too many people, then you're stuck in it. Well, no, you're not. Like, why can't we just like continue to follow that instinct? Because that's what it is. It's intuition
Mm-hmm.
and not put meaning to how it looks in the end. Because it's
Right.
really about how we get there and what we
Mm-hmm.
learn, why we're getting there. And so that is always something I think we all do. It doesn't even have to be like a new business, right? It can be a place you want to travel. or maybe work part-time when I do some personal finance group coaching. And, some of their dreams are so big. And I know that they haven't shared them outside of that group coaching class because that's scary, right? I have a practitioner who wants to only work part-time. Like, how am I giving up this big educational investment that I did?
Right.
Because they're looking for something different. They know that there's something different. They know there's something more innately in them, and they want to follow that.
What I love about all of these stories, and I am coming back to this so strongly, I feel like it needs to be shared with our listeners. Side hustle. Your side hustle doesn't have to be huge income producing. It doesn't have to turn into your main income producing activity. And yet, when you have a side hustle, it opens up so many doors just to your creativity. That alone, you have a decent side hustle where you're just kind of making a little income here and there from something else. Your job is going to feel less constricting.
Yes.
And to have somebody like you to guide somebody who is interested in a side hustle or has a side hustle, they don't necessarily want to grow it, but they kind of want to see what would happen. I keep thinking, man, that would have been so helpful to me. I had a 20 something year side hustle that changed over every part of my career until it became my primary income. And man, that would have been helpful to have somebody walk through what a side hustle would look like and how to build it or keep it or manage it so that it doesn't interfere as much as people assume it's going to interfere in the rest of their lives.
And just connecting with that fact that those side hustles we're going to go right back to the beginning, typically are going back to who we are innately.
Yes.
We crave that as humans. We crave what we were created to do innately. And we tend to change what that looks like because, again, success says you should do X, Y, and Z. Or, mom said I should do this, or dad said I was good at this, right? And so we stop and we don't go back to that thing. And one of the things for me was that I had to really own. I've always been good with numbers. Bookkeeping seemed really, I'm living in that. But what I had to realize is that my worth, my value as a mother was the message that had to be shared. Something that I innately knew from the age of 3. And yes, I do have memories from 3. And one of those really, really rare people was that I wanted to be a mom and a wife. But when you say that out loud as a society, we say, well, there's no worth. I mean, there's no worth. I mean, we know parents are, but there's not this. You didn't go and be a doctor. You didn't go and be a lawyer. You didn't go and be a nurse.
It seems uninspired to outsiders sometimes.
Yes. But then I stop and think about the absolute 100% impact I've had as a mother.
Mm-hmm.
And not just in my children, but my friends' children come to me for coaching.
Right.
My foster kiddos who didn't stay with us forever still text. The son's best friends that said, that's what I would like in life. Right? That's impact. And we just shortchange it because it doesn't feel worthy enough, right? It's not what society says we should be doing with our lives. But that innate thing is really how you're making your impact in life if you tap into it. But you said it's scary. And like, how can I start to tap into it and not just go all in? Well, that's like we do. We create budgets and we create plans, right? Workflow processes. How can I start this? Who can I ask? Because it's not usually what I know or when, it's who can I ask? That connection. We're going to go right back to that connection of who can I ask to help begin? And maybe it's one person to start and then the next person to start. That's for me, again, that's what I've had to do is like look outside of what the first coaching experience looked like and get really, really, really uncomfortable and seek the next coaching experience. Because again, it's evolution and I'm not who I was the first time. So I have to ask for something else.
Right. I like to refer to my friend Ann Wakeman, who lives here in Helena, Montana, and she had been the executive director of our food bank here in Helena, and just is an extraordinary woman, has given everything. She's just an amazing woman. She said years and years ago, this is so sticky. I've used this phrase so many times since I heard it. She said, build a diverse personal board of directors.
That gave me goosebumps.
And I've said it so many times, and I love to share this with Anne, and I'll make sure she gets tagged on this.
Yes.
Um, when you do that, you're looking for people who are your cheerleaders that are just going to say, oh my gosh, that's a crazy idea. What can I do to help?
Yeah.
Right. Then you're also going to have your advocates who are going to ask you the hard questions, not to dissuade you, not to judge you, but to make sure, help you think through what you want to do and how you want to do it. And of course, you have to have somebody on that personal board of directors who's known you for your whole life and can check if you're feeling that this is right for you at that moment, and they can sense it sometimes before you can.
Yeah.
And you have people who just admire and respect you that you can share these ideas with, that it won't matter. They're not going to judge you. So having all those people in your circle so that you know who to ask that question.
Yeah.
What resources do you have? And so now if somebody comes to me and says, this is what I'm thinking about doing, I can say, oh, I have a resource for you. Her name is Corree.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that is so, again, it's so scary. Like we don't to say, I don't know how to do this. So I'm going to go in search of someone to help me figure it out, or someone's. It's never one person, obviously.
Right.
It's always many, many people. And it's just so scary because again, you're speaking this dream out loud to the universe, to your peers, whoever it is, and you have no idea what it's going to look like.
Right.
And we so adamantly connect the word failure if it looks different than we originally envisioned.
Right, which is so silly.
It's so silly. So silly.
But this just brought me back, and I'm super excited. Super excited. That's the wrong phrase. I'm eager. I know, I'm still checking myself. I'm eager to hear your answer to this. I remember some of the first times that I received help without asking for it. And then I remember asking for help because I had received help without asking for it. I finally hit that point in my 40s where I felt like I could ask for help. And you're right, it's really hard. And I remember when I was in college and I wasn't even eating because I was trying to buy my books. And I was talking to somebody about it. And I remember having the conversation, but a few weeks later, I received an anonymous card in the mail with $200 in it, and it said, buy those books. Yeah, which is why I've done things like that over the last 30 years because I was on the receiving end. And then I remember when my husband broke his leg and we had two little boys at home and he was off his leg for 8 weeks. He ended up having surgery. We have a house that's an 1890s small Victorian home in the west side of Helena. And I remember like being at my wit's end trying to manage all of the maintenance in this old house. It was summer, so I was mowing the lawn and taking care of the two dogs and taking care of the boys and doing all the laundry. And he really couldn't do anything to help. And I was just at the limit when my friend walked in the door. I think she knocked and then opened the door and she said, I'm taking Alexis to the pool and I'm going to grab your boys too. She didn't call, she didn't text, she didn't ask. She just walked in the house, got the boys ready, and took them out of the house. And then a few minutes later, as I'm filled with relief and I can feel the tears at the edge, which I'm not a crier, so that was kind of a big deal for me, I heard a lawnmower and I look out my bay windows and one of my neighbors is mowing my lawn.
Love it.
And that's when, of course, I started doing even more. I've always been that person because I watched my mom and dad be that person.
Okay.
But man, it took on this whole different level at that point. And then I remember asking my accountant for help. Do you know a bookkeeper? And sending me to Heather Hudson. And that feeling of, I didn't feel weak. I didn't feel stupid. I felt empowered. I
Mhm.
felt like I knew what I was doing in asking for that particular help. So tell me your stories of that.
Oh my goodness. So many, first of all, but I will own like something like in part of my journey and part of my story. I'm actually just coming into this. So I'm almost 50. I'll be 49 in April. And I'm just now learning how. Okay. So things have happened obviously throughout life where you just things just show up, right? Like you said, they just happen. And so I think one of the first ones would be I was a teen mom. I was 18 when my first son was born, turned 19 shortly thereafter. And so I was in college, or I had decided to go to college. He was only 3 months old when I started. And I didn't have a lot of family in the area. But one of the things I had decided to do was become part of the student body program so that I could help pay for my tuition. And so I had to work in there, I think every day. Go back, that's been a while, but I think every day. And we had three advisors in there, and the two of the three advisors really just 100% took me under their wing, right? And I can remember like Tyler not being, I'm sorry, my older son not being able to go to daycare. And it'd be like, I miss school, I miss all these things. And it just puts me in that bottleneck of more, 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 right? So I would just put him in his stroller and we would go to school. And like, first of all, every one of my professors was fine with it. He
Mm.
wasn't a distraction. He came, we had some toys or he had nap or he had snack. But what did happen, those extra things, like you said, is that there was one day he just wasn't feeling well and he had an ear infection, he had chronic ear infections.
Mm.
And
Ugh.
both of my advisors just said, just leave him here. Let him play in the office. Go to class. And I was just like, really? Because I did not know how to ask for help at 19. 100%. I was
Right.
on
Me
that
either.
mountain doing it all, being it all.
Right. By self.
Yeah,
My famous first words, by self.
by myself.
Right.
And so I think that was probably one of the very first times I really had that experience of people seeing you,
Hmm.
valuing you, and just being a part of who you are, right? Like just that moment. So yeah, I think that would be my first story. And there's many, many more throughout that, but I think that would probably be one of the very first stories that I can come back to and really remember.
Well, that was perfect because I have this visual image of all of that, of you sitting in a lecture hall with a baby on your lap or in the stroller next to you, of you being able to leave the baby in the office while those two advisors just take turns bouncing him on their knee. And not only did they see you and see, they took an active role in
Yes.
your success. And I think, man, if all of us could look back and find somebody like that and be somebody like that to take an active role like that. So recently, when did you ask for help? And this is how we're going to wrap this up.
Yeah. So I would say, I'm putting meaning to asking for help. I'm going to own that. Like right now, I'm sitting here like thinking about this. But the most valuable thing that I've done recently was about 3 years ago, hired that first coach. And what I thought was hiring them to help me lose some weight and get back into a physical thing became this evolution of really untelling a whole bunch of stuff that was happening in me. So that was probably definitely one of the most impactful, and actually began to make me begin to see that there's something different in who I am.
Mm. So this actually it comes back full circle to two parts of our conversation. One is that idea that when you go to somebody for help, particularly you're paying somebody, whether that's a business coach or a bookkeeper or a personal trainer, it's never just about that.
No,
It never is. It never
ever.
is. And I can't even tell you how many times on my podcast people have said, well, I don't need to go to therapy today because it's never just about one thing because we're
No.
complex. And that brings us back to the very first question. The reason I asked that question about sharing something about yourself most people don't know is to remind each other how complicated we are. We're not just one thing. And when we choose a label, it doesn't have to be permanent
Right.
unless it's a tattoo. I have one tattoo, and I think most of my listeners know about it, but I have one tattoo on my hip. And to me, it is a label. It is a reminder of finding my voice at 40 by singing in a rock band for the first time in my life.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Yeah. And so we do have our labels. And the question is, which ones do we want?
Mm-hmm.
Which ones do we live into? You want a label of being a generous human, be a generous human. That doesn't necessarily mean money, it means time. It means taking an active role, right?
It means asking a question.
Yes.
I mean, it can be literally as simple as that, just asking a question and and then letting that person see what evolves when they've been brought to attention of why am I doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Over and over and over, asking ourselves to stop instead of completing that cycle that continues the unknown chaos, the unknown inactivity, whatever it is, and just stopping midway and saying, but why are we going back?
Right.
Right? Why are we going back to that? And it's huge. And that keeps happening because of that investment in self, right? Like that
Right.
time, money, it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, what about picking up a book that makes
Right.
you curious, right? Because that question could be in that book. I'm not saying you have to go out and invest in thousands of dollars of personal coaching. I highly recommend it, but that is for you to decide. But
Absolutely.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, reading a book that
Yeah,
somebody else has recommended to
yes,
you. And it doesn't have to be self-help either. I
no,
mean, that's one of the misnomers. Self-help is bullshit unless you actually change something or read the book with the intent of looking in the mirror and being
yes.
self-reflective and making
Cleaning up your
changes.
own side of the street.
Right, exactly. But I think of a book that my friend Jeff Eichler just gave me that I read. It's called The Quickening, and it's about a woman who went to Antarctica on a scientific expedition recently on a ship. And I got so much self-reflection out of her story.
Yes,
So I love
absolutely.
that idea. Read a book that somebody
Listen to
recommends,
a
and then
podcast you've never listened to,
yes.
right?
And see yourself in the people. I
Yes.
mean, be open to the idea that, oh my gosh, that just reminded me of something funny. I just have to loop back here. When I was a mother of young children, one of my friends who had five nearly grown kids said, never say, not my kid. Never say that because the next day it'll be your kid. And it's the same thing for looking at ourselves, right?
Yes.
We can't look in the mirror and say, oh, not me. I'd never do that. Or I have never done that. Because if you really look, you will find some aspect of whatever it is you don't want to see.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially as parents, you know, any
Exactly.
kind of leader position we're in, because as parents, we are leaders. We forget
Right.
that. And we are building somebody up and developing them into who they're supposed to be. Same with business owners or whatever you want to talk, teachers,
Employers,
employers,
teachers,
right?
nurses.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, and if we're not willing to really look in and say, well, why is that so um maddening to me? Or why do I feel so unnerved when people ask me this question? If we
Right.
don't look into that, we can't lead because we're not being vulnerable. You know, we live in a
Right.
society that it's weak to be vulnerable, but is it, or is it really, really strong
Yeah.
to
To
say, you know
to
what?
consider it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You have to be strong to consider where you might have gone wrong.
yeah,
And
absolutely. To say,
even
I'm sorry.
even that edge, right? Yeah, even just to consider
Yeah,
it takes serious courage to look inward and even consider maybe I could have done that differently. I mean, it takes courage to do that. And then, of course, the next step of being able to acknowledge it.
Right.
I love this.
As a parent, I feel like, it's like everyone says, oh, it should be the easiest place to do it, but it isn't, because but I'm constantly doing that. Like I, recently said something to my teenage daughter, and I sat in that for a few minutes, and I'm like, yeah, that didn't feel right. That didn't feel right at all. I don't think I got a point across at all. And so I had to walk in a room and just say, I know I came off really strong there. And I apologize. Here's the reason I'm struggling with that. Here's the reason that I'm not feeling calm and quiet about that. And she doesn't have to say anything. She doesn't even have to acknowledge it. She just needs to hear me, because when she hears me, she understands that that's safe and it's good and it's right, and how it made her feel and how she feels. She later on down the road will know, oh, I can make somebody feel like this.
Right. And I can make a mistake and acknowledge it.
Yes. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely.
What a different world we would be in.
Yes.
Well, we can't fix all the world's problems today, Corree, but I guarantee that we turned up the dimmer switch.
There we go.
For some folks.
Yeah.
And my listeners know that I don't believe in a light bulb moment where you go from dark to full bright. I believe in dimmer switch moments. And maybe your dimmer switch just got a little brighter. Corree, thank you so much for joining me on Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I have really enjoyed our time.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Listeners, now it's your turn. What is that side hustle that you've been considering? What could you go back to from your younger days when you had an idea of what you were really, really good at? That you don't necessarily have to make income at it, but that you'd like to explore again. Jot it down in the comments. Share it with me privately, because I am your audience for that, believe me. And if you are looking for a job right now and you want to make sure that you nail your interview, and that especially you are applying for a job that's going to be a good fit for you, don't forget about the course, Job Interview Storytelling. Go to elkinsconsulting.com/courses to take my job interview storytelling course. Even if you're not looking for a job, it's a great way to start collecting your stories, know which stories to share when for your own professional and personal development. Thanks for listening.
Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.